Hello, friends, and welcome to the Interworld Podcast, where we explore the intersection of personal and collective transformation. My name is Yasha S. Wagner, and I'm a PhD researcher in the field of psychology, well-being, and spirituality, as well as a founder of the Interworld Institute for Inner World Peace. You can learn more about our nonprofit initiatives by going to interworld.org. Today, I have the special honor of speaking with a friend, Alejandra Warden. And Alejandra is also, I see as a teacher, a spiritual teacher, and I know that other teachers of mine that recognize Alejandra as such, although Alejandra prefers to call herself a mentor and works primarily with the divine feminine, with Sufism, and with InterSpirituality, all in relation to the evolution of consciousness, and is a counselor. So Alejandra has students, leads retreats, and additionally is a director of the Charis circles for the Charis Foundation for InterSpirituality and New Monasticism, where we are both on the board of directors, actually. So this is an exciting opportunity to start expanding the different areas where we can collaborate. And I'm excited to keep learning from Alejandra and share this episode with the rest of you. So without further ado, here's our interview for today. Hi, Alejandra. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing, Yasha?
Good. It's good to see you always. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for invitation.
Yeah, so we have a lot of topics to get into this hour. It's a special episode for me. A lot of times I'm speaking with friends and musicians that may have a little bit less level of training and life experience and wisdom. So I'm really excited to learn from you and to have this depth of insight that you can share with us today. So
Well,
I guess...
it's called aging.
What did you say?
It's called aging.
Oh. Well, I don't know about that, but I think...
Oh, I do.
I think Reb Zalman had that. I think the term of from aging to saging. I think that. So yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear a lot more about your journey and your teachings and insights today. And I'm wondering if we could maybe actually start with that and just learn some more about you. What were some of the key defining experiences and moments in your backstory, your origin in life, and then your training and studies?
Sure. Oh, where to start is a long life. I'm almost 66. I think that for some people, there is a particular moment in which things start to wake up or to change. In my life, it wasn't like that in reality, because I always say that I was, you know, how people come and they kind of forget where they come from. And then there is this kind of remembrance, recognition. I didn't have really that moment. I never quite forgot. Something in me remained kind of connected. And so for me was actually learning to live with that, the difficulty. So if I have to say a moment was when I finally was able to say to myself in front of the world, well, this is the way I was born. I spent many, many years not knowing how to define myself, not knowing what to say about myself, not knowing what should be kind of secret and what I would be able to speak. So it was a difficult journey, not because of trying to find the divine, but more likely how to face the world with that truth. So it's kind of different in that sense, but the difficulty was nevertheless. So I end up going through many difficult experiences from physical abuse, including rape with my first husband, having to run away and ending up with a false teacher, So I had difficult experiences that sometimes other people do not need to have because they are still in the process of trying to define themselves. For me, it was looking for somebody who would understand me, which I would talk and feel that there was something in common. I finally found that in my teacher, my Sufi teacher, and I spent with him over 20 years. And I became his representative in Latin America, and then right now I'm on my own, because also part of this lack of closing, that I call it, my teacher, I have like what I call my invisible teacher, my transparent teacher, who's one of the teachers in the lineage that my physical teacher was, which is the Naqshbandi. My teacher is Ahmad Sid Hindi, who actually lived 400 years ago. But I didn't know who he was for many, many years. I would only receive his teachings through dreams. And that's the reason that I also became very interested in dreams, trying to understand this voice that I was hearing. I come from a very intellectual and psychologically intellectual family. And for me, this story of voices and stuff like that was something that probably was not the right environment to have them. So that's also another reason why I was trying to understand whether what was happening to me was normal, because in my family it was not normal. So then I was able to find the name of that voice, and it happened to be somebody from 400 years ago from the Naqshbandi tradition. So I was in the right tradition all along, but I just didn't know exactly how I end up there. Also, in the process of that, I had a kind of death experience. In reality, I had 2 or 3 death experiences, and part of that is that I was born dead. So I was revived when I was born, and I think that actually defined also a little bit my life, because death has always been very close to me. So I think that one of the reasons that I had a couple of death experiences, near-death experiences, was because I was born dead. Might have some kind of connection into going into certain spaces faster. Nevertheless, I had, in one of those experiences, I had a deep encounter with the sacred feminine, the divine feminine, in the form of visions. It was kind of a divine feminine archetype, I would call it, and received 7 months of teachings, intense teachings from this source. And eventually I was asked to start transmitting that. That is also another reason that I end up becoming super interested in dreams, because I was interested in finding out if the visions that I was experiencing were, again, within the normal or not. So most of my life I was trying to find out if I was normal or not through different means.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So where are you from originally?
I am from Argentina. I was born in the province of Cordoba, which is an inner province in the middle of Argentina, the very heart of the country. I didn't live many years there because my father's job required that we traveled. So we traveled a lot while I was young. And then we end up in Buenos Aires at one point, and I lived there, and that's where I had my school. I worked as a Montessori teacher for over 15 years before we came to the United States. I ran a school there. Actually, I founded and directed 2 schools, and I was trained by a woman who was a Montessori disciple, Frances Wolf, and she was 87 years old at the time. Then because she couldn't give me an official degree, she sent me to the United States. And that's where I met my husband.
Your first husband or your current?
No, my second husband.
Okay.
My first husband was Argentinian, and
Okay.
I only lasted in the marriage 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to run for my life.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a life journey, and sounds like a lot of powerful experiences and influences, including even Montessori. And then your Sufi teacher, that you became his representative in South America, you said?
In Latin America.
In Latin America. And who was that?
My
If you can
teacher?
share. Yeah.
Yeah, Llewellyn Bonley.
Llewellyn Bonley, who's a pretty famous teacher, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
Sufism. Yeah. Very cool. So what would you say? I guess I just want to clarify for listeners, like when you said that a lot of people have a moment that's a defining change of like waking up and remembering, but for you, it was more like having not forgotten and learning to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really beautiful. And I guess I wanted to elucidate that a little bit for people because I think from what I understand, you're kind of referring to it in terms of spirituality and mysticism and having like a spiritual transformation or like a rabbit hole waking up of like people going into an expansion of their awareness where they may be noticing synchronicities and feeling connected with everything and all these types of sensitivities and changes that happen. But then there can also be like at the deepest level of what that's all about is something that's not like an exotic temporary peak state or
No, yeah,
phase, but
exactly.
and I can relate very much personally. This is something I only shared once on this podcast, and I tend not to share all that often in general, but is maybe one of the most like close things to my heart, which is the way I relate to what you were saying about the forgetting and the remembering is that it's a question of who we are, right? And if we're not just this body and these thoughts and these feelings, then there's this soul perhaps that like transcends that or outlasts the incarnations, right? And so remembering who you are at that level from before birth or like a prenatal soul memory and connection to these other realms and so on. That's how I personally relate to that because I grew up with that deep, like explicit named sense of remembrance of the spirit. So I was curious if that's kind of what you meant and how, but it sounds like just from childhood you had that connection to the nature of being.
Yeah, for me the difficulty was that was more like I was sent to a nun school, and so I learned everything from the Bible and stuff, and it didn't make much sense to me. So I was, even though I never reacted to it, they could feel. They always considered that I was a little bit of a rebel, and the reason is not that I was trying to be rebellious. I just didn't fully connect. I didn't fully understand how was it for them. For me, everything was right here. I couldn't imagine at that point. Today, I understand what is the immanent and and the transcendent aspects of the divine. But in those moments, being a child, all I could feel was the immanence aspect. So when they were talking about an idea of something being outside in the heaven, for me, it was not something that I could relate to. So from that place is that I started this journey, being a Catholic, going to Catholic schools from the age 3 all the way until the end of university. It was like I was full with these concepts in which I was struggling, trying to incorporate them and be able to understand. Eventually I did, and I found the words, but it took me a while. And what I was referring, it was what you are saying, exactly your experience. But I also would include people that start the journey. Sometimes they don't know exactly what they are going, but they have a smaller experience, like a deception, or they get depressed and they start wondering if there's something else. Is there meaning? I'm lacking meaning. So one of the things that I find with the work of interspirituality, with the work of interconnection on the perspective of consciousness, is that it starts bringing meaning back. Mm-hmm. And from that place, I think that the feminine has helped me a lot to be able to bring together the masculine and the feminine together into this new consciousness that I call consciousness of oneness. So that's part of the work that I do, is to try to bring meaning. And I found that the feminine, with its understanding of oneness and unity and togetherness and connection, can lead into that. But of course, doing it consciously, because the feminine is unconscious from the perspective of consciousness. So you cannot just do it the way it used to be done before we had this more developed consciousness of differentiation. But today we have to do it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this. And I think that some of what we're talking about is so meaningful and important that I want to make sure we unpack it, because it may be a little bit advanced for some of the podcast. I relate to it and understand it, what you're saying well, but I also know that there's layers of meaning to it, and I want to make sure that they're clear.
Sure, of course.
I also just want to name that the way you're saying meaning, I like how you associated that with where people might start questioning through something like a deception or a depression or something like this, because then there's this feeling of meaninglessness. And what it made me think of when you said that is how it's like, it's also about depth, right? And it's the nature of what's really motivating us, and how are we really relating to life and existence. And there's this automatic surface level way that we can relate, and many of us do on and off, but we can only really stay there only for so long. And that's just the level of like basic, automatic, unconscious, predictable, constant, like human behavior of seeking pleasure and compliments and trying to avoid the pain. And so when something comes to like break that apart, well, I can no longer find my solace in this possession or this relationship or this thing that's defining me or that makes me feel pleasure, right? And instead I'm confronting the unpleasant and the things I thought I wasn't and the things I didn't think it was, and so on. And so it's like that confrontation with actual breaking apart and not getting what you want at that superficial level of like normal human activity of chasing the dopamine distractions and stuff. Then we have to like look deeper for what's the real point. Like, what are we looking, which even has some similarities to the way that in my Sufi lineage in the Nayati Maimuni order, we define some of the meaning of the zikr and the movement and the search outside, and how that collapses and brings us to a deeper inner meaning, and so on. So so I want to go into all these things, and even dream work and psychology with you, because we have so many areas to explore together. But let's just start one step at a time with each of these, and let's just start with your main focus, right, which is the evolution of consciousness. And let's really focus on, what does that mean? What is the evolution of consciousness? What does it mean that that's your main work? And we can go from there into understanding things like integration, oneness, unity, and we'll get into the other topics from there. So why don't we just start with that?
Okay. One of the things that I understand from consciousness is how it's completely related to love. And for me, that is what has been my call. The connection, the deep intrinsic connection that exists between consciousness and love. So if we look at life, the first kind of love and the first kind of consciousness is instinctive. And it knows unity. Just, I always say, it's like the pregnant mother knows the unity with her baby. It's something that you know is there. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to be conscious about it. It has its pros as in cons, in the sense that we see life. We see that attraction and rejection play tremendous roles in that form of instinctive love. But it definitely knows union. I think that as human beings, we experience that when we are very young, and also then when we are adults, if we do not learn some kind of deeper differentiation, and how eventually we develop an ego when around we are 2-3 years old. We start developing an ego, and that makes a little bit of a difference between us and the environment, between us and our parents. We decide that this is me and this is the other. And that kind of consciousness in the world, it's been going on for many thousands of years now. It's been developing gradually. Of course, the feminine consciousness or the unconscious continues staying, and it continues playing a role in the collective forms, in the collective unconscious, and also in the personal unconscious. So it's almost like we pull it back in order to feel differentiation, but it continues existing in us. And that is part of the inconvenience of this situation that I call that what called me to evolution, because we have developed an ego as in individuals, but we are not fully individuated. So what I call is like we became person in the sense that we are an individual person. We are unique in many ways, but in many other ways, we continue being completely dominated by our instinctual tendencies. So, and those are going to come to us a lot of the times unconsciously, or we're going to justify them with our heart, with our head, but they are not really, in the same way that they disconnect us from connection and union that has the feminine. When we develop an ego, it also separates us from love, because love is the source, is the force that knows unity. So now loves become something towards oneself, but not necessarily gets connected unless I am falling in love and with all the problems that falling in love has, or with your own children. But it's moments. It's not something that flows all the time as the main source. So it's almost like love becomes two forces at that point. One is the love of union that is more impersonal, and then there is this love that is truly personal, that has to go everything through me. So I think that right now we are in this moment on a collective level, at least in the West, and this lack of connection has brought lack of meaning, because when you do not connect, you don't know what we are for. You don't find the bridge that tells you this is the reason you're doing this. And it's not a why, it's a what for. Because sometimes we think that with the why we might find a justification, even a source, but continues function in a certain way as justification. But the what for is what really puts our body into something. So I found that by doing the what for, what you're actually doing is reconnecting. This reconnection brings a value, and that value again brings us back to a quality of love. Not all the love has many qualities. One of those is appreciation. So what I realized is that as we continue developing in this separation and discrimination and division, we needed something to bring back. And this is what for me is the consciousness of relationship, the consciousness of oneness, in which we bring back the values and sense of connection of the feminine together with the sense of being unique, special of the individual, sense of separation. So these two things, for me, is the new stage of consciousness for the West, for the Western person. And what I also coincides from my perspective with Jung's vision of integration and individuation, which is bringing back the unconscious and the conscious together to the place where we can hold it, because of course the unconscious is so vast, but enough that allow us for this kind of integration. And I notice that the more we become more and more individuated, this new love comes back. It's a love that wants the best for others, not just for ourselves. So it becomes much broader, and it becomes conscious. So it becomes conscious, and that is the part of separation, the observer in a certain way, the ones that realizes something, but together with the deep sense of union and togetherness of the instinctual, which is the mother.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm clear enough, but
I love
that's...
it. I love it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's see. So it, a lot of what I'm hearing is it's actually like paradoxical, but it makes sense once you kind of pierce the meaning, which is that kind of what I'm hearing from you. It's only paradoxical based on the use of the language, but
Yeah.
it's like the union and the love and the connection and the togetherness is the divine feminine and is unconscious. It's like our nature.
Mhm.
And that may be where we come from long time ago, thousands of years ago, is this natural state of connectedness with,
Mhm.
and that's a more universal connectedness. It's not just a personal love, but it's a natural state of more oneness, more union, more connection.
Yeah.
But that and this relates to the evolution of consciousness, even in a Jungian sense, and in an evolutionary sense, where consciousness goes from that through what I'm hearing you describe as a masculine process. That what is sacred about it is that it is conscious. There's a consciousness that develops from the unconscious. The gradually more individuated self emerges, where there's a differentiation and a distinction, and an observer, an object and subject, and it becomes that I'm like this, and here's my unique gifts, and now I'm 2, and now I'm 3, and give me my spoon, and you know, it's like this is what I'm like, and I prefer avocados, and
Mm.
so you get to become more separated, which can be dangerous because in that hyper masculine paradigm that we've been living in, we get warfare, we get division, we get discrimination, we get the idea of different countries and ethnicities and religions and attitudes and so on, because it's all growing out of that consciousness of, in a positive sense, uniqueness, but in a dangerous sense, division and separation, right?
Mhm.
Rather than and then what I'm hearing you describe as integration, what we're growing towards is like the unity and diversity, where we're returning to the divine feminine oneness that we came from originally thousands of years ago, that is our true nature, except we're doing that in integration with the power of the consciousness that is the masculine ability to observe and consciously love, consciously, like almost like we're choosing union, we're aware that we are one, and so on. So that's a
Yes,
very
it's
interesting.
similar.
Yeah.
Well, you see it also similarly at how the baby is born, because the baby inside the womb of the mother is in complete union. There is no separation. That is pure love. When you breastfeed a child, or the beginning of the times of the child is completely united still. Then it starts learning how to be separate, and then eventually will find a partner, whether within themselves or with another, but there's going to be some kind of union, and again it's going to bring another child. For me, this other child is this new consciousness, because it has these two capacities, and you can see it in people that already have developed it, how they are able to bring, for example, connections with foundations, with organizations for the betterment of the world. There is an instant understanding that we cannot do it alone, that our own personal joy is not transferable. So there is something instantaneously that evokes a different quality of love. So I am very positive in a certain way, even though I see all the difficulties that are arising in the world. But I see also a lot of possibility, especially in young people.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful. There's a shift happening. You believe, like I do, in the possibility of a new paradigm where this
Yes,
integrated
absolutely.
consciousness wants to happen. And I also hear you saying that the spiritual or internal evolution, which is, by the way, why we call our podcast and our nonprofit Interworld, because it's the inner and outer, the inner world piece. But I hear you saying that the inner evolution of consciousness is mimicked in the biological evolution,
Yeah,
almost like a metaphor. It's illustrating the same thing, both at a micro and a macro scale, from generations to epochs.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
But also cosmic, if you see
Right.
it from a certain perspective.
Yeah.
So realities, there are certain ways in which reality manifests. And depending on where you see it, you're going to find very similar patterns.
And I'm also hearing you say that the feminine, and this is related to what you said at the very beginning too, that there's this quality of felt presence and immanence and this tangible relationship to the sacredness that's in everything all the time. And that's something that we're just like have to perceive directly, let's say. Like it's not a concept, let's say, right? But then there's also this other dimension of that you called more transcendent, which maybe relates to that observer consciousness, of like there's the immanence and then there's the consciousness that can observe that immanence, and then the integration is their relationship and bringing them into relationship.
Yeah, and you also see that in the sexual union when a child is going to be brought into the world. The female is the one that feels the baby inside, but the male sees the whole process from outside, can feel it, can have a deep heart connection, but the birth is also going to see it from outside. So that is the way also consciousness works. I want to explain this clearly because sometimes people say, oh, that is, men also have feelings or women also have a mind. This is not about women and men. This is about feminine principles and masculine principles that are represented as forms of consciousness, and that usually women tend to have more attunement with the feminine and men with the masculine, but the work is to bring both together.
Well, so, it's also like Hazrat Inayat Khan, and this is why I love one of the, I know it can get new agey, but personally, I love one of the elements of the new paradigm of spirituality is that we can connect all the world's ancient traditions with the findings of modern science, that they're not actually at odds. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because, like Hazrat Inayat Khan, another Sufi teacher, would teach that nature is the sacred text. Nature is the scripture for us to be reading and interpreting as our teaching that's passed down like a book, like a holy book, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because if we observe nature, like, you know, reproduction, men and women, animals, plants, the elements, like when we just observe things and we interpret that, then we're receiving lessons about the nature of reality. It's not like some sort of rigid or concrete description of how everybody needs to think or be or how things work, that all women are this way or all men are that way and so on. It's an interpretation of the sacred text of science and nature of like, well, you know, what does it mean that water rises from the ocean and travels through the sky and becomes rain and goes back down the mountain and the river, and that it's a cycle and that the sun controls the whole thing and that it makes life when the water feeds the plants? It's like we're studying that, right? So the fact that a woman will gestate a baby inside her body generally, whereas a man has another role, is all teaching us something. Like it's all showing us something, like a sacred text. Yeah.
The important thing of what you're saying from me is to understand it as symbolic, and to be, I think that the transcendence aspect also has to do with being able to see the essence, the meaning of what you are looking at. Because what you're describing is looking at the essence. Yes, we're looking at the process of the water, but you're looking at the essence. What does it mean, that roundness? What does it mean, that repetition of a cycle? What does it mean, all those possibilities? And I think that that is the aspect of bringing transcendence into the immanent as well. And I think that when we talk about immanent, sometimes we are doing that process, but in reality, in pure immanence is not noticing the divine, the abstraction of the idea of, or the conceptual synthesis of that process, but it's actually adoring the process itself. So you're adoring a plant, you can adore the hundreds, thousand gods that you can find in ancient history. And the reason is that at that point we're becoming concrete, something that is abstract. So now what we're doing with the concept of transcendence, if we unite it with the immanent, it's actually bringing together this complete new dimension of reality, and in which things start becoming together. And I think that's what I love to work for, and to bring that bridge. And I think that many people have already got it. So then they need to go into other levels of depth. But that one is the first one.
Yeah, and I want to explore those layers of depth with you. But I also just want to say that I love what you clarified just now, because it's like without the observer to step outside of the process of, let's say, the rainwaters flowing and study what does that imply, then there's just a direct participation and adoration, which is the immanent feminine unified relationship with it. But on the other, so then you wouldn't be noticing it, like you wouldn't be analyzing it, you wouldn't be. But the other thing is that if it's just the removed observer, there's no material to pay attention to.
Exactly.
Right? If it's
That's
just
what
the
the
other,
lack of meaning I talk about. You
right?
know the process, you can describe it, but it's a floating idea somewhere. It doesn't have the meaning, which is the importance, the appreciation, the awe,
Right,
that comes with the miracle that life is.
right. And whether we look at like the process of pregnancy and birth, or we look at the process of water cycles in nature, there's like a material there that's the direct first matter, which
Exactly.
is which is the actual thing we're seeing. But then there's the seeing process, and that's like the noticing of the pattern. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's a linguistic root there, etymologically, that the material, the matter, is related to the maternal.
Of course.
It's like that's the first matter, the prima materia, the maternal, the material is the pregnancy and the birth, or the water cycles. That is the matter, the material that we're talking about. But the study of it is the noticing of the pattern, and that's the paternal. Linguistically, that's the pattern that's behind the material is the paternal, or the father. Very cool. And the last thing I want to highlight from what you said is that you gave us also a practical example. I think that's important to ground these conversations, not just in exciting ideas, but you gave us an example of young change makers recognizing that they need to collaborate with others and create connections and networks between organizations for positive purposes and so on. So that sense of effort, like the same effort that might go towards the masculine approach for thousands of years of building armies and empires, you can put towards creating connection and unity. So I wanted to point that out, that you gave us like a practical example there of a way to apply this type of thing to life. But I want to invite you, I want to move on soon to Jung, which you brought up, and Dreamwork and some other topics. But I want to invite you, if you want to give us some quick examples of what you mean by going to the deeper layers beyond what we just explored. Yeah.
I think that part of the integration, it's also confront the archetypal forms, because in a certain way we need to continue to become individuated. If we talk about it in terms of energies, you would say you need to become individuated in all the layers of the astral plane, right? But when you talk from the psychological perspective, in order to really reach further and further into what we call the self, and this is even beyond our higher self, but really something beyond that, you're going to encounter a lot of archetypes. You're going to encounter a lot of forms of of manifestations. And one of the dangers that happens as we become more attuned to our unconscious is the possibility of being eaten up by the unconscious, by one of those archetypes. So part of the work of individuation for me has to do with recognizing and not being absorbed and continue going deep. Roland Von Lee, one of the things that he taught me, and I think he said publicly, but specifically because of my own process, he was telling me that sometimes we have to cross the world of the archetypes to be able really to find some freedom. Because while we depend on archetypal forces, which are in many ways more advanced forces than just the personal, you're still within a certain limitation. So for me, the most important aspect of consciousness and the development of consciousness is freedom. And I find that freedom means to be constantly finding the limits and seeing how you integrate and move beyond it. And we are going to find that a whole lifetime might not be enough, but doing as much as we can, the more of these walls, mental walls that we find, they are not just walls in our personal life of objects or work. It's much deeper. It's our personal beliefs, our personal thoughts. And it's not about getting rid of them, but truly integrated what is need to be integrated and to move past. Then we can start developing what is called more like a planetary consciousness and even a cosmic consciousness, something that doesn't have the limitations of our personal culture, our personal country, you end up, you start breaking those walls or going past those walls. So your family, it is important, you love them, but you start building different kinds of connections with those things. Your parents become your friends, for example, and you love them, and you're going to be their children all their lives physically, but something happens in the connection. So you don't know. The reason that I'm giving that example is because one of the things that I notice, and I'm going to say with a little bit of sadness, is that I work with people that are older, like me sometimes, and they continue having this connection with the parent of the little child. And so I see how we are over and over enslaved by different ideas, by different concepts, by different social parameters, concepts, religion, philosophy, everything that opens the door to a broader perspective in life, which means a broader consciousness, eventually will also find its walls. And you're going to find those walls and you will have to decide what to do. Am I going to get here stuck, or I'm going to continue moving beyond? Mm-hmm. And for me, in my personal life, I think freedom is the one thing that I think is one of the most important things for me and to give to others. Mm-hmm. So I think that every limitation, it's actually like a picture in which we put ourselves and we feel more secure. But in the long run, there is so much we will not know because we are not moving away or beyond those limitations. Of course, what I'm saying doesn't have an end because the divine doesn't have an end, but I want to do the best I can in this lifetime for me and for others.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. You reminded me, this is so sweet. You reminded me, I as a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry. And in the spirit of Sufism, it's a really short one, but I'm going to share it because you just reminded me of it so much. And I wrote this poem many years ago, but it's very similar when you said that. It's like we meet that, it's like a picture and it has limitations, but we can go past that. Years ago, I wrote a poem that goes, "The painting does not end where the canvas meets the frame. For the paintings may take different forms, but the painter is the same. It continues down the plaster wall and out into the hall and up through every one of us with details large and small. We are all a part of an ever oscillating, self-creating work of art.
That's beautiful. Well, this is similar. Yes, definitely. Because I think that it's beautiful to be in the picture and to have a form, but eventually becomes a limitation. And for some people, that's fine. As a matter of fact, if we look at nature, nature has the freedom, the limit of a plant is just the capacity of the plant. And when we look at monkeys, I'm going to give the example, or elephants that now we realize that they look at a mirror and they see themselves, it's an evolution for them. And how difficult it is to reach that evolution. How many hundreds and thousands of years pass before they can have that kind of evolution. And you can see how nature it's trying to reach the infinite by the capacity of multiplicity, of reaching so many different options, that's how it's trying to reach infinity. But that is not infinity. Infinity is not necessarily a bunch of different things. Infinity is a different kind of consciousness, and it's just one. It doesn't have to be that many. But in this concrete level, nature tries to evoke that reality by creating all these different forms, which the human form is one of its greatest advances and gifts. But if you look at a tree, the tree can give all these sorts of things, but that is the limitation. A dog can do all these things, and we can teach them and train them all these things, but there is a certain limitation. When we put ourselves within the limits of the collective unconscious in whatever form, being a family, being a society, being a philosophy, being the study of Montessori, being whatever it is, we're expanding, but we're putting ourselves in a new container. So the possibility of humanity is to continue breaking those containers and expanding, which is not something that the rest of the animal and plant world has as much. But we put ourselves in those containers because we also have an instinctual part of us that wants to feel secure. When you try to expand, definitely there is not security.
Yeah, I used to also, when I was having sort of mystical experiences in my teen years, I liked using the word boundlessness because it implied a lack of bounds or barriers, whether inside or outside. So it could be infinity or it could be oneness, but it's the removal of those barriers and a boundlessness instead. So I like that. Yeah, I know that we have a little bit of time left to go into some more topics. So I want to move on to Dreamwork. I know this is another topic that we both love. We both do Dreamwork. I want to see how it connects to what we're talking about and really just hear about your approach to Dreamwork. I'll maybe come back to this at the end if there's time. I know that we've spoken about you coming and offering some sort of retreat in our organization here. But I also, we're building a whole academy. We're creating a hybrid academy with online courses and stuff. So it'd be really great to just hear about you, educate us and our listeners right now a little bit on Dreamwork, how you approach it with people, so we can have a little understanding of that.
Well, they do different approaches. On one level, there is the Freudian, which is the first one that I learned, but then I learned about Gestalt and then eventually I went into more Jungian and in particular mystical, which, because William Lee is a Jungian psychologist, but one of the qualities that he had, which I haven't seen in other places really, it's what I call mystical approach, which is something that comes from a synthesis, comes from a different place of consciousness within a certain, within himself for sure, and he was able to interpret the dream in a way that was completely transformative for the person that was the listener. So putting that one aside, which I recognize that I have access to that, but I don't want to use it at this point in this conversation because it's a different quality of work. But for me, one of the beautiful things about the Gestalt and Jung is to be able to look at the dream as parts of oneself. So that allows, on one level, for the person to be able to understand whatever they are able to understand. Because, of course, and then I'm going to say something else, there are many different levels of dreams. There are from the dream that you're just pretty much regurgitating what you've been living during the day in a more symbolic way, but then you go into dreams in which you find your shadow aspects that you know about, that you don't know about yourself, and suddenly appeared in the form of figures or sounds or feelings or environments or landscapes in many different ways, those shadow aspects, but also, usually it's animals or people. Then you have the inner part, kind of an inner partner, which you can find females or males that are particularly attracted or more connected to finding your own wholeness. And then you have more other archetypal forms in which you find mythical creatures, mythical themes or environments. Then you have psychic dreams in which you see the future, or you discover a secret from somebody that comes through a different dimension, which I call them experiences, dream experiences. They are not really dreams from my perspective. It's more being attuned on other levels, like the astral plane, and you bring that knowledge. Then you have teaching dreams, that you have dreams with teachers or with books or sources in which you learn. There are many different kinds of dreams that you can look at them. But the important thing is what matters for the person to be able to learn what they are able to learn. Because one of the things that I found with teachers, and that's why I call myself mentor in a certain way, and also with interpreters of dreams, is that you can say whatever you see, but if that doesn't touch the person's personal experience, in which there is some kind of aha moment or a moment of, oh, that's true. There's nothing, it's just another bunch of information that is filling your brain with ideas, but actually doesn't drain into your system. So for me, one of the most important things is to lead the person into finding their own understanding. Then, of course, I can come with an archetype, if I see archetypal images or things, to bring them to go depth. But in general, I will take the dream up to the level of what the person can do, unless I receive a direct instruction that I need to break something because that person needs it at a particular time, which is this other quality of dream that I'm talking, that usually you cannot really teach. Then Jung, of course, uses the lines, the kind of a calendar of dreams in which you put all the dreams and the different themes that we use, of course, this as well, because that is more for a personal understanding of one's own dreams. And then I work with the people based on what they see. But when I give a course, for example, I go through many different kinds of dreams and ways to approach dreams, how to recall a dream, how to work with the dream through going deep in meditation and contacting the different aspects of the dream, or the dream itself, or a particular character of the dream. It's immense. It's a whole universe, the world of dreams and what you can do, really. You can represent them, you can draw them, you can paint them, you can dance them. I'm sorry, I can go over on and on because
No,
I've been doing this for, I don't know, 30 years or so. But the most important thing that I found in teaching and in dream work is that it doesn't matter how much information you have, you're going to learn whatever you can learn, and that is all you take with you. The rest is just clouds in the sky in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I love Dreamwork too, and it's so rich. And one thing that I like to differentiate is that, to me, Dreamwork includes both interpretation, which is working the dream the way you're describing to extract meaning, but it also, and that can be extracted, conceptually, or it can also be integrated as an intuitive awareness and change in yourself and so on. But that's one aspect of the dream work. And then there's practices of dream yoga and approaches to dreaming and consciousness, states of consciousness through dream practices, right? I mean, dream yoga is a term that's used mostly in the Tibetan tradition, but there's many different global traditions. Like another example of that would be whether it's Sufi or other types of group dream work or more tribal and indigenous dream work approaches. There can be a sort of psychic magic to doing dream work in a group, where what are the different connections and what does it mean to you and to them and so on.
We do that. I do that
Right.
kind of dream. What I do not do, unless the person wants to do it themselves, I can teach it. But what I don't practice it myself or teach it in general is being awake in the dream, dreams. And the reason for that, it doesn't mean that I don't have that kind of dreams or people do not have them, but I don't promote that work within myself because I want to receive the full message of the dream, and I don't want to develop my ego inside the dream or the astral plane, except for as an individuation process. But I don't want to tint with my ego, because then I don't know if I can trust the message of the dream as much. So for that reason, but group dreaming happens and can be a practice, as you say. It can also be that somebody has a dream for another, which also comes in many traditions. For example, indigenous traditions, that they also do this.
Yeah, and I also think that the caution that you're expressing goes both ways, in the sense that cultivating a certain type of lucidity can infiltrate either direction and either side, and that there's a potential danger to either one, because you can either become too normal daily ego consciousness in your dream world, but you can also become too loosey-goosey, thinking that everything is a dream in your waking life. And so either direction can infiltrate, into across the border if you do that kind of practice, which can have its own risks and need its own cautions.
I find it. I know that many traditions use them, but for me, it has that danger aspect. And so I'd rather, if I have the experience, I have them. And if people have the experience, we work with that. But I don't promote it.
But I do think that there are beneficial and effective and safe ways to work, maybe not with just trying to get lucid as its own kind of obsession, or thinking that you're dreaming all the time as its own kind of obsession, because that's not necessarily what I think the real practice would be. I think that there's just different approaches to dream practice, like dream work that's not just interpretation, such as, for instance, if you have dilemmas, I think it can be healthy to meditate on your dilemmas and let your dreams answer them. And you'll be surprised as you cultivate that relationship with your dreams, just like remembering them and writing them down is already bringing consciousness to the unconscious there. In the same way, asking your soul questions to be answered by the dreams, and remembering those answers and applying them to your waking life is another example of this type of practice. And I think why I think this is so valuable is that ultimately I believe it becomes connected to the whole idea of remembrance, right? Because remembrance is such a multifaceted term, but it's like we can become lucid not in a loosey-goosey or woo-woo sense, or like a confused sense, but lucid in the sense of living life more lucidly, with more presence. If we remember our dreams in the morning, if we remember our daytime at night, right? It's like this integration and this remembrance that I think is very valuable, and that ultimately goes beyond the one day or the one dream to remembering your whole life, and beyond your life, remembering who you are, and ultimately remembering the ever-present.
Yes, I think that we're saying the same thing in different words, but definitely when I work with people, a lot of the times it happens that I say, why don't you ask your soul to send you a dream, and then you work it out or bringing it to meditation. And I do believe that it's super important to be awake, what I call awake, all 24 hours a day. And that is remembrance, definitely. I was pointing specifically to the development of the ego directing the inner world.
Exactly. Yes. So that's great. So I'm glad we put two different types of caution there, as in like, don't jump out of a building because you're doing dream yoga.
Exactly.
And in the same way, don't, overtake your inner world with the ego. So I think those are two good cautions. But that being there, I do think we're saying exactly the same thing, which is that there's a higher or deeper level of dream work that's ultimately about what you called awake 24 hours, right? That's like the deeper truth of that. And I think that to me, it relates to panpsychism and like my studies in alchemy, for example. When I look at alchemy and the debates people have of, is this external working with metal? Is it internal working with psyche? But the teachings of panpsychism, or the panpsychic perspective on reality, says that it's not different. Like, is a dream real or is it imaginary? Well, it is real, just like the daily life is imaginary, right? Ultimately, it's all real. It's just the material it's made out of is psyche. It's right. So it's I don't know. It's not just inner or outer. That even like our daily life is giving us dream messages in the same sense, right? And so on. So yeah, I think that the nature of, ultimately it can reveal something about the nature of reality. Like, what does it mean that we could have a premonition in a dream? Maybe everything's interconnected in mysterious ways and not just a dense sort of machine. So yeah, it's a good
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. In a certain way, for me as well, is the fact that everything can be real or unreal depending on how do you look at it. And in each level, things can be real or unreal. And from one perspective, you can say everything is unreal, this doesn't really exist. But from another perspective, it's completely real. And you have to take it as that. And then that's how you learn. You cannot learn by separation. Really, in the long run, in order to integrate means bringing something within. It's almost like eating, right? It's the process of eating and digestion. And I think that it has done a lot of damage to believe that the world is unreal, because then it prevents us from living in it fully. And on the other side, the people that have to be completely all day long in a different contact with reality, they cannot be earth in here. There isn't much you can go much higher, because you become disconnected. That is one of the biggest teachings of my teacher, was the more rooted you are, the higher you can go. Otherwise, you become divorced. So integration, for me, that is one of the greatest things that Jung did, from my perspective, is to really allow for people to understand what integration means and to be able to live it in themselves from many different perspectives, but always to the same core.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to say one last thing on Dreamwork, and then I know that we might have to do a second episode someday because we're clearly have a lot to explore, and there's a couple more topics I want to get to. But just on Dreamwork, the last thing I'll say is I'm working on a lot of innovations. I'd be curious to hear what you think about them at some point. I won't share all of them today. Different innovations kind of in psychology, models of things that I find very interesting. And just one of them is I still working on a name for it, but it's about this continuity that relates to the nervous system and to transitions between nervous system states and peaks. So there's like the deeply parasympathetic autonomic nervous system state that can go all the way to like a certain brainwave state, a certain biological state where the nervous system is in complete rest and digest and deep sleep, right? And then it can also go to the other extreme of the sympathetic autonomic nervous system state that's extremely alert, extremely activated and creative, and so on. And then there's also a transition or like a midpoint where the two meld.
Yes.
And what I'm really interested in is how do we make that transition more conscious so that we're weaving, like when we fall asleep, when we wake up, we're weaving awareness through the boundary between the two so that it's no longer a hard line separating the two halves of the conscious and unconscious.
Yes, I think that is a super important, because also a lot of the fact of that we don't remember many things is because of the transition being so fast.
Right.
So I completely agree. And I think there are many techniques for that.
Mm-hmm.
One that worked for me very well at one point, and it's just one among the many that you can have, was not only being concerned about what I remember, if I remember the dream fully or not, or whatever happened during the night, because there was a time that I could remember 10 dreams in the night. It was kind of overwhelming because it was too much. But either to be attentive to the mood I wake up,
Mm-hmm.
or when I'm having a shower, what are the thoughts that come? Because or when I go to, if I go to meditation fast enough, or I'm in silence, because at that point you start bridging again, even if you're apparently completely awakened. Of course, there are many, but I think that if you can find something there, it would be incredible, because it would allow for this consciousness to start expanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a challenge for many of us today with phone use as soon as we wake up or before we go to bed that can mess with that transition.
Yeah.
But
I think it always
yeah,
had. People would get out of bed immediately.
yeah.
Also, now we are revaluing dreams. There was a period in which people, on a general collective standpoint, they didn't have any importance on dreams. Dreams were completely intranscendental.
Right. Well, yeah, I just in this, and the last thing about this model I'm working on, the same way that I think the line between the transition can become like more of a dotted line instead of a real border, I also think that the zigzag can become a wave. So what I mean by that
that's
is
awesome.
when you go to one extreme, you don't have to be completely disconnected from the opposite extreme. So it's not just the transition between the two sides, it's the transition from peaking to one and coming back towards the other that can become softer as well, so that there's not a hard turn. It's not a hard right turn. It's actually a curve, meaning that, for instance, when your nervous system is in a deeply parasympathetic state of relaxation and unconsciousness, that you can bring consciousness there. What does it look like to be deeply calm and peaceful without needing to pass out? What does it look like to be deeply calm and peaceful without needing to be lazy? What does it look like to be deeply calm and peaceful with alertness there? That's an interesting meditation, so that there's awareness being brought to the unconscious there. And in the same sense, on the opposite side, what does it look like so that would be, for instance, instead of a depression or a lethargy, it's like a peace and a calm. And on the other side, there's this similar curve that I think can happen where we're not just oscillating to the opposite extreme of anxiety or nervousness or like super activation where we lose our connection to calm. It's like, what does it look like to be in an excited state but retain your mindfulness and your peace and so on?
It's
Right? Yeah.
called centeredness.
Yeah.
I call it certainness. But what I also speaking, which I love because I think it's true human from me, means that kind of quality of centeredness. But it's also related to what I'm saying when I'm talking about interconnection, the consciousness of interconnection. You're explaining that in that field. Interconnection doesn't go like that. It goes like this.
Yeah.
So it can bend.
Yeah.
It continues having filaments on both sides. And what you're talking about has this quality in the world, in your field that you're explaining, has that quality of interconnectedness, where things do not get divorced from another, where things do not come to a point in which this is white and this is black and there is nothing gray in the middle. I find it fascinating. I think it's fantastic.
It's also it causes us to always question the extreme that we're in. As soon as we go into a polarity, we're using the opposite polarity to complement and even cast a little bit of doubt on the polarity we're in, meaning, like, let's say an emergency happens. It's like there's still some part of you in the most terrible situation that can question from the other side, like, okay, well, maybe this isn't actually the most terrible. Like, maybe I can still laugh about it or something like this. And maybe I can still find the solution. I don't just have to be completely devastated.
I think it's fantastic.
But on the opposite side, it's like, I'm also questioning, like, oh, everything is going perfectly. I just got a BMW and, I'm so happy about my new friendship. But it's like at that moment, there's the opposite side is still questioning, like, well, maybe this is great. Maybe I'm super enlightened this week or whatever, but I'm also questioning, like, okay, but difficulties might still arise. Like, maybe there's still some purpose I need to remember here and so on. So yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Topic.
It also is good. It really good for the ego not to believe too much, to get so serious about oneself.
Yeah. Anyways, that's a whole realm of these innovations we could get into another time, but thank you for listening. I want to ask you to speak to us about InterSpirituality. What does it mean? What is your work in InterSpirituality? And yeah, just introduce our listeners to that field.
InterSpirituality in my case is because I found that it's the natural. I didn't even know there was that word existed, but that is my nature. For me, it means the capacity to go deep into some area or field, in this case, a spiritual field or religious field, that you feel attuned. And then you start finding the connections. Again, it's about interconnectedness. It's about finding that some of those teachings, you might find them in other sources, or you can expand what you have learned through sources that are not directly connected to your particular lineage. And for me, that again is related to what we were speaking all this hour, breaking the walls, but not destroying them, just expanding, allowing for that possibility. I want to bring it as a difference with somebody that says, okay, I don't have any tradition whatsoever, and I'm going to do a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there. And I call that interspirituality. I call that an interspiritual experience, but not an interspiritual journey in the sense that there is a certain depth of inner commitment to a particular journey, even if it's an interspiritual journey, in which there is a certain seriousness. It's not just like a visitor of different techniques. I find that can actually be sometimes even dangerous to be just practicing whatever technique, because our psychics need some kind of rooting in order for something to flower. So there is a need of some kind of depth. But once you have that, the opportunity, in the same way that we can start feeling that we can learn from anybody, that we're always learning from anybody, and that everyone is learning from us, whether we know it or not. The fact that we are being influenced by everything all the time, by a collective unconscious, by our social values, by, as we find, is again breaking these walls, is what you were saying, is finding connections rather than seeing this is life, this is not life, this is good, this is bad. Finding where is the limit of each thing, how something that I always say that, for example, you start walking and you cannot run if you continue walking. So there are certain things that need to happen to be able to expand. And those are these connections. I find that InterSpirituality offers today, especially to young people, something that we on the older side did not have. We had to seek, which was, where is the depth of what my soul, where is my soul singing? I think InterSpirituality allows us to find the singing of our soul through music, through poetry, through philosophy, through religion, through different forms of spirituality, through exercises with the body, through meditations, through walks in nature. There are so many ways in which we can connect with our soul. And if we can look at it as an interspiritual experience, then interspirituality for me makes sense. And then you can start, you're open to learn. For me, interspirituality means a capacity to flower where each petal has its own particular color, their own particular perfume. I found that it's the way of the future. I think that the more interconnected we become, the more we are going to start becoming interspiritual, whether we want it or not. Because you're going to be making a meditation from a certain tradition, but then you're going to be doing spiritual chanting from a different tradition. And maybe you're going to find in nature a third way to connect with source. And that is the beauty of becoming just like life. Life is about diversity and connection. That is a possibility that we didn't have before. And I think young people, many young people, have a consciousness today that is much more integrated than ever before. When I hear you, Yasha, I'm marveled and I'm so happy because of your capacity to think and relate and to abstract, but at the same time bring it into concrete. It's something that is so difficult sometimes. It's been so difficult for my generation and before, because we had to break walls that, thanks God, today are easier for those who want to go deeper within themselves and do something good for the world, are going to have more openness. So I'm super grateful of hearing you and listening to your projects and your capacity to bring them into this realm.
Thank you, Alejandra. I'm touched. That's very sweet and very flattering. I love the collaboration, and I'm not just saying this to deflect. I genuinely think that real consciousness from both elders and youth together at a global scale is what can make the change happen. Like people like yourself that have actual wisdom to actually empower the new generations to do what they know they're here to do, and to feel encouraged and have guidance and support and mentorship. That's going to make the real change that's needed, is that collaboration between everyone from the different cultures, different generations, which comes back to interspirituality, right? It's like,
yes, for me it does. It's completely related.
Yeah. We have this new opportunity for the ancient lineages to transmit not just some cherry picking surface level stuff, but actual transmission, initiation, transformation, training, but from what's becoming more and more a global perspective, what's becoming more and more an inclusive and interspiritual angle. So yeah, it's kind of inevitable. I think it's the force of
It's
nature.
inevitable at this point. Yeah, I agree with that.
So then it's like, how do we work with the force of nature? We can't resist it, but we don't have to just completely unconsciously surrender. We can participate. It's like, where do we channel this energy that's happening? Like,
Yeah, that's the danger of this time. That definitely there is a rise of the feminine. Definitely there is a rise of this sense of interconnection and unity that it didn't exist on a collective level, conscious for a long time. The danger is that takes over and you become again taken by the unconscious, by the collective unconscious, rather than really becoming free and becoming a true individual.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, this is so beautiful. Well, I hope we at least do a follow-up episode someday, and I think we could, work together, make a whole course, a whole retreat, and all of these things in the future. I just want to end with the last couple of questions. So the first one is Sufism. I know it's a huge question, but maybe for listeners before we wrap up, since it's been a big part of your path and we have not featured it enough on this podcast. We've had a lot of Eastern traditions and yogis and stuff. So maybe you can give us a short taster, and one day we'll have you back. I think we'll have Natanal on, so we'll have some real Sufi focus at some point. But for now, you can give us an appetizer for people to understand what that's all about.
Sufism for me is the path of love, and is the path of conscious love, is the path of recognizing love in everything as a force, which for me, that's why I said consciousness and love are parallel and they intertwine tremendously, because that's my experience of the feminine, and that's my experiences in Sufism, how love can actually bring you into knowing something that you can never know except if you are in that union, in that togetherness, and you come out. For me, Sufism has been the source of my original teaching and learning as a person. It brought me in consciousness of the deepest, how could I connect more consciously with the deepest of myself? It brought me a language. But Sufism, what it has is the capacity to bring you into connection with the heart through music, through poetry, through meditation. It's a path of wisdom more than a path of love. Some people call it a path of knowledge. I call it a path of wisdom because it brings together deep levels of true deep wisdom and knowledge at the same time that opens the heart. One of the beauties of this path is that it starts opening the heart chakra, the heart connection. And the heart has all these dimensions and subtleties in which you go deeper and deeper and deeper into layers of union with your beloved, with your love. And your love is the divine under whatever form that you call that. And for me, it's my beloved. And you are just following like a certain song internally from me. It's like your soul awakens and says, this is the way I'm going to lead you inward or forward, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's inward. And inward is going through layers of different dimensions, from the created into the uncreated levels, into the dream world, into experiences that go deeper and deeper into union. I always say that I don't need to take drugs because the experiences that I'm giving through Sufism are so deep and altering in my consciousness that I think that if I would take something, probably maybe I explode. I don't mean to say that there are other traditions use them and they are fine, but in Sufism, I find that the energy that is produced by the heart chakra starts absorbing the mind. So it's very easy, simple, a direct path into where you go finding union with the deepest core of ourselves. That's how I would define in my life Sufism.
Mm.
And I also need to say that it's not Islamic for me.
Mm.
I know my teachers, Ahmad Hindi, definitely he was Muslim. But on the line of Llewellyn, it became more, I wouldn't call it interreligious or interspiritual, but definitely it's not Islamic anymore. And people have their own personal birth religion. You don't have to change it. But what we do is we incorporate all the tenets of Sufism, which definitely are Islamic in nature.
Yeah, I love it, and it's similar to a lot of what I'm researching. You know, in terms of alchemy too. It's kind of in the Enlighten order or Enlighten lineages. I've heard it described as this universalist Sufism, where the Sufism itself can be applied to your own tradition as like a active ingredient to turn that on. So yeah, the transformative power of it. I also really enjoyed hearing your whole description. It was making me think a lot about the lataif, right? The subtleties, and there's some beautiful writing about that and the esoteric meaning of the subtleties, which relate to the subtle organs or sense perceptions, but also very much similar to the chakras and so on. So
yeah, there are I work with that in my tradition very deeply because we use them for development of consciousness also.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and ask one last question, and we'll close here. I love when I encounter certain particular repeating points of connection like this. We're both interspiritual Sufi dream workers, and my studies are at Pacifica. You just gave a lecture at Pacifica, but one of our biggest connections is we're both on the board of Charis Foundation. So I want to just invite you for this last question to share a few words, anything that you want to mention about your work with Charis as the Charis Circles director, and anything that you want to make sure we mention before we wrap up here.
Well, thank you. Well, Charis Foundation, it's trying to promote, one aspect of that is trying to promote interspirituality. And the other one is this new kind of monasticism, which is basically a kind of monastic life in everyday life, not in a nunnery or in a convent or etc. So how to do that? We do that through the Charis circles, and that is more the external part of the work, in which we are promoting a meditation and a collatio, which is a kind of a reading, a spiritual reading in groups, in which we have a silent meditation. And then we go into this contemplative space. And in the contemplative space, what we do is we have this reading, and people share a little bit of what they understand or what speaks to them from that spiritual reading. The spiritual readings are interspiritual. And so it means that it can come from many different sources. And the meditation is also interspiritual. Anyone can do it, and out of that directly we go into the spiritual reading. These are circles. The circles are for people to start building small communities. These are very small groups of people that start getting to know each other so that the readings can go deeper and the way of building connections start working in this form very respectfully. So we learn how to listen, deep listening, and also deep sharing. There is another aspect of that we also do, which are retreats in which we teach from an interspiritual perspective. So we have in that work, I represent usually the feminine, and we have a person that represents Buddhism, Christianity, Sufism, some Judaism at times. So different traditions are coming to give talks, and then we have sharing of space together. But the goals of those retreats is really to learn to live a contemplative life in everyday life. So we share teachings during the retreat that then can actually bring it at home. We're trying really to bridge this disconnection that sometimes happens with retreats, that you go in the retreat, you go deeper into state, but then you arrive home and you're completely disconnected. It takes you a while to land, or something terrible has to happen for you to bring you back into everyday life. So we're building ways in which people can actually bring more of a contemplative experience in everyday life with doing whatever you're doing all the time. Another aspect of the foundation is the dialogues, and the dialogues is by invitation of different people that have been studying or working very deeply on a particular tradition, and they come and represent that tradition in dialogues where we respond to questions or to themes, and each one speaks from their own perspective of their own tradition. That is part of what we do.
Very cool. Yeah. So it's again about integration, right? So the new monasticism, the bridging to the next paradigm of how do we bring the contemplative to the everyday? How do we bring it home, right? How do we bring the monastery home into our relationships, into our work, right? It's no longer divorced from the worldly, the immanent, the daily life, the spiritual, the transcendent is completely integrated. How is my relationship, my training? How is my job, my practice? How is my home, my temple? How is my existence and conduct, my daily meditation, right? So it's beautiful. It's very, very important, I think, for this time. And sorry, were you going to add one thing just now?
I was going to say that we are going to start a formation also. We've been forming it for several years now, but now we're going to actually be bringing it into the world because we want to continue doing this aspect and bringing teachers and sources that can actually bring students that want to understand more form their own interspiritual journey.
Yeah. Great. Beautiful. Well, people can learn more by going to charisinterspirituality.org and
Carrie, no, let me see.
Yeah. I think it's charisinterspirituality.org. You can double check it.
Yes, charisinterspirituality.org. Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality.
Yeah, which I know the address because my nonprofit helped build the website. So if you want to learn about Charis, go to charisinterspirituality.org. Or if you want a nice website like that one, you can contact us at interworld.org. Or like the videos that are on the homepage we helped put together. So I've enjoyed being a connector. We also have a connection between Mandala Center in northern New Mexico and our Interworld Eco Village here in southern Colorado. So it's been really fun to bridge things between the two nonprofits. And there's a lot of overlap there with the team, with the projects going all the way back to when we started Heartfire Festival events, where, spiritual teachers and elders and guides would come together with high quality offerings, with art and music and youth culture, and we'd all celebrate
How
together and
fun.
pray. So that's been a long time collaboration between Charis and my nonprofit. So hopefully people are interested to learn more and can be in touch with all of us if they want to learn more. And yeah, let's keep exploring together. So thank you for coming on the podcast today, Alejandra. It's been a really good conversation.
Thank you to you, Yasha. It was wonderful to talk to you, as always.
Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. Peace.